Hi, my name's Rebecca from ingvid.com. Today, you're going to learn how to speak more professionally in business situations. Now, at times, it's all right to use informal language. It's acceptable in everyday situations, but there are times when you'll want to create a more powerful impression, and at that time, you want to be able to use business English. What's the difference between general English and business English? Well, sometimes there's not very much difference. Sometimes general English is used in business context, but sometimes you use a higher level word, and that's what I'm going to teach you in this lesson. Let's look at some really easy, common examples. For example, if you say, or if you want to say, I got your email. In regular English, you might just say, I got your email. What would you say if you want to make it business English? You could say, I'm giving you a clue, the word starts with R. Instead of saying, I got your email, I received your email. Okay? Now it becomes more formal and more businesslike. Suppose you want to tell someone, I need your help, or I need some help. What word could you use that starts with R instead of need? Require. So instead of saying, and you can also change more than the verb. The verb is the key, but you could say, instead of saying, I need some help, you could say, I require some assistance. Now you've changed two words, the verb and also a noun. Let's try another one. Let's talk about it later. Which business word could you use? Let's discuss. Let's discuss it later. That sounds much more professional than saying, let's talk about it later. Next one. How do I get in touch with her? What word could you use instead of that? How do I contact her? Okay, good. Please make sure you arrive on time. Which business word could you use instead of make sure? Please ensure. Okay? Please ensure you arrive on time. Please give her your travel plans. Instead of saying give, you could say, please provide her with your itinerary. There we've changed another word. Instead of saying travel plan or travel plans, you could use the word itinerary. An itinerary is usually a piece of paper or a document that lists your travel plans. When you're departing, when you're arriving, where, when, and so on. Please let them know when you'll be arriving. Please let them know. Instead of that, you could say, please inform them of your arrival. Okay? Good. Please tell me why you've made this decision. Please explain your decision. Could you please talk some more about that subject? Could you please elaborate? Could you please elaborate on that? Now, this is actually a very useful word if you go to a conference or a meeting and you want someone to speak some more about a particular point or issue. It's a good kind of question to learn. Could you please elaborate on that? So to elaborate means to speak more or talk more, give more information. How are you going to fix this problem? Better than using the word fix is the word solve. How are you going to solve this problem? All right? So try to do that. For every simple word that you know and basic word that you know in general English, Try to find a slightly more formal version, which will be your business English word, and use these words in an office environment. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe to my channel on YouTube. And if you'd like to do a quiz on this subject, you can also go to our website, www.ingvid.com. Thanks very much. Good luck with your English.
Previous video, we discussed the fifth speaking task, proposed a solution, and presented strategies for addressing the task. In this, our final video, we'll be looking at question number 11, express an opinion. Once again, we'll be using sample questions taken from the TOEIC Speaking and Writing Sample Test provided to us by ETS. Let's go ahead and take a look at the topic. In this part of the test, you will give your opinion about a specific topic. Be sure to say as much as you can in the time allowed. You will have 15 seconds to prepare. Then you will have 60 seconds to speak. Some people prefer to take a job that does not pay well, but does provide a lot of time off from work. What is your opinion about taking a job with a low salary that has a lot of vacation time? Give reasons for your opinion. So what do we notice? We have to give our opinion of the stated idea. We have to give an organized response that follows a logical progression of ideas. And of course it involves our personal opinion. Now this brings us to our first TOEIC hint, in that when we see a question on the TOEIC, we have to be able to quickly recognize the common types of questions that they could ask us. So part of the problem, of course, is we don't have a lot of time to prepare. So after the question is read, we only have about 15 seconds before we have to give a response. So in this way, we need to familiarize ourselves with the common question types in order to give ourselves kind of an advantage on the test. Now basically they fall into four categories. A preference or choice, and these questions are usually worded as would you rather or would you prefer, or some people believe this or others believe this. Others are kind of like agree or disagree type questions, or sometimes they're worded as favor or not favor, or support or oppose a particular idea. Some are what we call hypothetical. For example, if you could. And then finally, others are just straight out opinion questions. Now, one thing you will notice right away on the test is that sometimes a question may ask your particular opinion, but it actually is asking you to think about what you would prefer. So if you think about our particular topic, even though our question is about our opinion of something, we do have the idea to say, well, maybe this is something we don't prefer. So part of the idea is if we support the particular opinion, then we would give positive ideas. If we don't support the opinion, then we might want to consider giving some negative ideas, or thinking about something we would actually prefer. Now we'll talk more about the strategy in just a moment. But first, let's look at these types of questions and see if you can identify their question type. So take a look at a couple of these examples. You have just won a contest, and for your prize you can choose either a small car or an airline ticket. Which would you choose? Use specific reasons and details to support your answer. Okay, well, what question type do you think it is? Well, it is a hypothetical question, and asks us what will we do in this situation. You could also think of it as, even though it's a hypothetical question, it's also asking us to make a choice. Would you choose the small car or the airline ticket? So in this case, it's not really happening to us, but in this way we can think of it as it's a hypothetical question that also is asking us to make a choice. Let's look at our next one. Would you rather play an individual sport or a team sport? Well, this one should be pretty clearly identified as a preference or choice. Notice the wording right at the beginning, would you rather. So in this case, we do have to make a choice between the two. Let's look at another one. People should stop working at the age of 60. Do you agree or disagree with this statement? Well, again, right there in the wording, you should recognize that this is agree or disagree. So in this case, we have to say, do we agree with that statement or do we disagree, and probably explain why. Some people like to travel with a group. Others would rather travel by themselves. Which would you prefer? Well, in this case, again, we have a preference or choice. We're given what one group would like to do, and then we're given what the other group would like to do, and we have to choose which one. So again, you'll notice a lot of the questions are really just asking us to say what we would prefer, but the way they're worded really depends on the choice of words they use. And again, sometimes we may have to think a little bit differently of how to answer. But if you've noticed with all four of our choices, we basically do have to give something of a preference or choice. Now, in terms of preparing for a response, the key to keep in mind here is that since this is the most complex response on the TOEIC speaking section, we need to understand the difference between how to prepare for the test versus preparing a response during the test. Now, this next section, we're going to discuss both strategies, but we're really going to keep in mind that preparing for the test will take lots of practice. So the first thing you have to understand is that in order to use your 15 seconds very well, you're going to have to put in a lot of practice time before you even take the test. So let's talk a little bit about strategy. One of the things we're going to do now in preparing for the test is to think about how can we be better at thinking a little more deeply about the topic. And in fact, how can we do it a little more quickly? Well, one idea we're going to do is something called brainstorming. Now, brainstorming is a word activity where we try to think up words and ideas that relate to the topic we are discussing in a specific period of time. Now, brainstorming is a great way to get us thinking about the topic in more direct terms, rather than just trying to jump in and organize a response. However, we don't just want to sit down and write random ideas. We need some way to organize them. So in this next section, we're going to play a little game called Pros and Cons. Now, basically, pros and cons refers to how we can think about a topic a little more deeply. So in this case, it's a test preparation tool. This activity takes far too much time, and you couldn't use it on the test itself because you'd have too little time to prepare. But it's a great activity to get us to demonstrate how deeply we need to start thinking about topics that maybe we don't think about every day. So the idea here is we're going to identify the strengths and weaknesses of each side of the argument. And in order to be confident, we need to engage in this sort of deeper examination of what the question is really asking. So and the idea here for the pros and cons, pro, of course, referring to what are the positives, and cons refer to are the negatives. So what are the pros and cons of both sides of our sample question? Now remember, both sides really, again, the idea here is that it kind of mentions a choice, but we have to think about what's our opinion of taking a job with a lower salary and having lots of vacation time. Well, the idea here is that there is an opposite side, because the opposite would be taking a job that pays more money but has less vacation time. So even though this question is asking us to think about our opinion, it really is, again, kind of thinking about a preference. And we need to give our opinion of this idea and maybe express what we prefer. So here's how this is going to work. Take a piece of paper and follow along with this. So the first thing I'd like for you to do is to divide the paper into a top half and a bottom half. And then at the top half, I want you to write the words high salary and little time off. Then I want you to divide the paper again into a left half and a right half. We're going to put pros on the left half and cons on the right half. And this way we're going to do this for both sides of the argument and give us some time to think about a little bit more what this topic is asking us to do. Okay, so I'm going to pull up my pen tool, and what I want us to do is think about, maybe see if we can think of at least two pros of this idea, so two things that are in favor, and then of course two cons. Well, the first thing we can think about the pros, of course, is we get more money, which of course is always nice. So we'll put more money. And of course, more money can lead to other things. Certainly, it could lead to a better house. It could lead to a better lifestyle, better car, that kind of thing. So we'll just make a few notes here. Okay. Another pro for this particular idea, of course, is even though we may have little time off, we can go to better places. So, for example, maybe we get only a few days or a week off. Well, during that week, maybe we can go to a nicer place. For example, maybe an island, or maybe we get to travel around Europe. So the idea here is that even though maybe we don't have more time off, notice the question doesn't specify how much time is a lot of time off. So even if we have a little time, of course, we can go to better places. Now, of course, this directly relates to our first con, which means, of course, is that we would have less time to spend there. So we don't get to see as much. And maybe we don't get to relax. So this could be a problem. Obviously, we can go to nicer places, but it may take us a long time to get there, and we don't get to relax as much or enjoy ourselves. So that's certainly a big con when we think about this particular idea. So yes, maybe we make more money, we buy nicer things, and we can go to better places when we have vacation time. But then, of course, we have less time. We can't relax, and of course, we have less time to actually even spend in our house. So I guess less time would also connect to the idea that we might be able to buy more things, but maybe less time to enjoy them. Okay, let's try our next idea. So again, we're looking at putting the low salary and more time off at the bottom half of our paper, and we're going to do the same thing. So let's think a little bit about the pros and cons of this idea. Well, obviously one pro, of course, would be more vacation time. So that's certainly a pro, which also could be not only just more vacation time, but maybe even more time for our family. Because again, just because we have more vacation time doesn't always mean we have to travel somewhere. We could just take that vacation time and spend it at home. So that might give us an opportunity to spend more time with family too. Now, of course, the con, well, as we said before, the places we're going to maybe not as nice. Since we're making less money, we can't visit places that are as nice as we could if we had more money. So maybe instead of traveling to an island like Hawaii, maybe we just have the time to be able to go to some local places. So that's definitely a con. And of course, the other problem could be that even though we might be able to take off more time, maybe our family can't. So maybe our family may not have flexibility. So this is certainly a thing we have to think about too with our family. Are they flexible with this particular schedule? So again, we're making less money, which is certainly a con. But the idea here is we're not sure, are our family, do they have the flexible time either? So again, that could be a problem. So again, we've tried to identify at least, a couple of different ideas, and of course we'll mention the fact that there's less money here. So we've tried to mention at least some pros and cons of both arguments. Now the question, of course, is to think about, are we supposed to kind of indicate, do we prefer this particular situation? Well, in the argument itself, the essay itself is asking us to think about what's our opinion of this situation. So in this case, we probably want to think about discussing, well, there are some pros, but there are also some cons of this argument, which might want to go ahead and start thinking about that these are the things we need to mention in our response. So in general, making our choice on the test, this is the key to think about. Now, again, with a lot of the other choices, a lot of the other question topics, sometimes we don't have just a simple opportunity to describe an opinion. Sometimes we do have to make a choice. So some things we have to think about is which choice are we the most passionate about? Which ones can we identify with more deeply? Oftentimes this is the answer choice that might give us more to talk about. But sometimes we recognize that an argument might be easier to make, or maybe more logical. So in this case, which one might seem even more positive in nature? This one might be the better choice to make. So again, part of the idea is looking at the question itself and then start to think about, well, which one is going to give me the most to talk about? Many times it's the one I feel the most passionate about, but other times it's focusing on one that may be more logical. Now, in this particular example, maybe you feel more passionate about making more money. So that's certainly something important that you could mention in your essay response. But on the other hand, you might say to yourself, well, time is more important to me. Is that an easier argument to make? Is it more logical? Well, again, I think in the real world, oftentimes we don't have these kinds of choices, but this is the example that we're given on the test. So again, thinking about our topic, what is your opinion? What choices would you make? Do you think it's a good idea? Do you think it's a good idea to take a job with a low salary? What is your opinion? Would you prefer to do that or not? Well, one thing that I often tell students when it comes to preparing a response is don't sit on the fence. Now, what does that mean? Well, sitting on the fence means not making a commitment to one side or the other, trying to remain indecisive or perhaps see the value of both of the arguments that are presented. Now, it might be possible to give an answer that includes both of your choices here. You might be able to think about, well, I would like both of them. But I think in this case, it's not required of the task. And remember, you only have 15 seconds to prepare. So in my suggestion, it's better just to choose one side of the argument and stick to it. So as we said, in making our choice, after we look through our pros and cons argument, we need to think about which ones help strengthen our argument. So as we think about the reasons for the opinion we discussed previously, which of the pros and cons statements should we choose? Well, again, if you think about if we agree with the low salary, more vacation, do you remember some of the pros and cons we discussed? Look at the pros and cons you made. Which do you think would make the best argument for your choice? So now we're thinking about how to deliver a response. Well, once again, questions 10 and 11, as we mentioned in the previous video, they are now scored on a scale of 0 to 5 instead of 0 to 3. And for question 11 specifically, the keys to a good response involve cohesion and supporting details. In other words, we want to be able to use good signal words and, of course, include specific information. So as we look at the final chart here for the response, notice it says that we need to clearly indicate the speaker's choice or opinion. And we have to give a response that's intelligible, sustained, and coherent. We want to make sure that we include reasons, details, arguments, or exemplifications, in other words, using examples. We want to make sure that the response is generally well-paced, that we have good control of those grammatical structures, and that we use effective vocabulary. So in this case, when we give a response, the key is thinking about how to organize the response and to make sure that we provide lots of interesting things to say. So I like to tell students that a good response is coherent, which means it's logical and relevant to the topic. It contains good grammatical structure. There are no major errors that prevent understanding. Of course, contains good vocabulary words. Uses interesting words and ideas for expression. It's well structured, which means it has a nice flow between ideas. And again, that's what we referred to earlier, using good signal words to organize the response. It contains a very few filler ideas. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about those in a moment, but those are ideas with long pauses or and so on. And of course, finally, is intelligible, which means you may have a few pronunciation or speaking mistakes, but generally we can understand you. Now, in my particular opinion, I believe the TOEIC really is looking for more interesting vocabulary words. In fact, I think that's the most important thing the TOEIC wants. So in this section, we're going to talk about how to avoid words that I like to call blah words. Now remember, the Express Your Opinion task is ultimately looking at your ability to express yourself, which usually means using those good specific vocabulary words. However, too often students rely on words that are very general or vague in meaning. And I like to call these blah words, because really they're used so often that oftentimes these words lose all of their meaning. So let's look at some examples. Over on the left side, we have some very common blah words. Over on the right side, I'm going to give some examples of words that might make your response a little more interesting. So instead of saying something is good or great, say that it's outstanding or excellent. Instead of saying something's nice, perhaps say something is pleasant. Instead of bad, say that something is maybe disappointing or awful. Instead of something that is fun, say something is thrilling or exciting. Instead of mad or angry, use words such as infuriating or upsetting. And then finally, instead of just saying that you're happy, use stronger words such as overjoyed or elated. This task itself, the task of expressing our ideas, really, I think, in my opinion, is asking you to think more about the words you use instead of just the grammatical structure. So, in my opinion, using strong vocabulary can cover up for a lot of other problems. So as you practice for this part of the test, really try to include specific interesting vocabulary in your responses. Now, as we're starting to organize our response, one of the first problems students often have is that they don't get to the point. They spend way too much time kind of getting ready for the response. So the idea here is that we want to be able to get right to the point. And oftentimes students will try to repeat the entire prompt in their response. That only wastes valuable seconds. So don't think of this as a personal essay or a prepared speech. Sometimes textbooks want to call this part sort of like a speech or some sort of prepared personal essay. It really isn't. Instead, I want you to think of this as what we call extemporaneous speaking, where you just give a very brief introduction and that's all you need. Now, extemporaneous speaking involves delivering a spoken response using only a few prepared notes and relying on some basic organizational ideas and strategies. Now, of course, remember, you can't actually write anything down on the TOEIC. So in this case, we have to be able to give our response very quickly. So, for example, we could say, I don't agree with the opinion that a low salary and more vacation time is better. So notice how we just got to the point. We didn't spend a lot of time saying, kind of thinking about the actual basic argument here, or comparing low salary and more vacation time versus higher salary. We just went in and started giving our opinion. I prefer having more vacation time, even if it means having a lower salary. So again, notice we just got right to the point. We talked about that we agree with this. We prefer having more vacation time. So in this case, we're getting right to the point. Now, think about, in this case, what's your opinion? Remember, don't repeat the entire prompt, just get to the point. Now, a little bit later, I'll give a sample response, and you'll see what we mean. Now, another problem in general of getting to the point, and this is not just at the beginning, but also getting to our main ideas and main points, is when we use these common speaking errors. Now, we didn't talk a lot about these in the previous videos, but this is certainly something that's common throughout all of the TOEIC tests. We don't want to use a lot of these speaking mistakes. So again, these filler ideas are ideas such as false starts or interruptions, such as stuttering or saying, Again, a couple of times, maybe not so bad, but if you use it a lot, that can be very distracting. Overuse of the same words, often connecting words. Words such as and, but, or because. Many times students will just say and, or but. That gets to be very tiresome after a while. Again, filler words. These are often more common in conversation. Words such as like, or when people say it's like this, or it's like this. Those are filler words. They really don't have any meaning. Other common speaking mistakes involve long pauses or gaps in speaking. So, for example, a student might say, and then pause for a moment. Again, that's something the TOEIC does not want you to do. Other times, students get very nervous and they speak way too fast, Or sometimes they speak way too slow and they don't have enough information that you can listen to. And of course, finally, one problem might be that our words are unclear or unintelligible. Now, in general, what happens if you make a mistake? Well, the key thing to think about here is that we just need to keep going. And I usually tell students that if you make a mistake, don't go back and correct yourself. Just keep going. Because oftentimes, if you try to correct yourself, you might become more nervous. So, in this case, if you do make a mistake, just simply move on to the next part. Move on to the next idea you want to say. Of course, we know that's easier said than done. Really, the key for building confidence for this part of the test is to practice, practice, practice. Now, another idea we need to understand is that we need to use personal examples whenever possible. Again, these topics are about your personal opinion. So we have to be able to give our personal opinion or belief. And I think that also helps your response become more memorable and more interesting to listen to. It actually sounds like that you know what you're talking about. And we call this authenticity. It sounds real. Now, here's an example I'm thinking about using for this speaking response in our situation. And of course, this is actually something that happened to me. I've been an English as a second language teacher for adults for 14 years. When I first took the job, I got a huge salary cut from being a public school teacher. But I gained so much more in job satisfaction and the ability to take more vacation time in a much more flexible way. So if you notice, I mentioned two things already. I mentioned that the job itself, that being satisfied in the job was more important than money, and the fact that I could take more vacation time in a flexible way. Now, public school teachers, of course, do get a lot of vacation time, but they don't get to choose when to take it. So in this case, I can use my real life because I can take a little bit of the same number of vacation days. Certainly that's more than a regular job, but I also get to take them at different times throughout the year. So that helps. I certainly don't get paid a lot of money, but I do have a lot of flexibility and a little more vacation time than a normal job. So again, notice here I mentioned the particular situation that I took this salary cut, which again is referring to less money. I certainly am making less money than I would be if I were a public school teacher. And then I mentioned those two reasons, job satisfaction and, of course, taking that flexible vacation time. So if you notice, using personal information makes it easier for the listener to identify with and visualize the information you're trying to say. So I often like to tell students, show, don't tell. Don't tell us that you think this is better. Show it to us. Has this happened to you in your real life? And I think also it's important to understand that oftentimes students from other countries think, well, no, students aren't going to understand me because this is from a different country. But the truth is there are many things that are the same across cultures. So I think in a way, if you describe something that is personal and very detailed, we can often find universal themes in these personal anecdotes. So I think the idea here is that if you get personal and use supporting information, people can visualize it and understand it better. Okay, so now it's your turn. I want you to practice delivering your response and remember to use personal examples. So I'm going to put the topic back up on the screen. Let's review it one more time. Some people prefer to take a job that does not pay well, but does provide a lot of time off from work. What is your opinion about taking a job with a low salary that has a lot of vacation time? Give reasons for your opinion. So I want you to pause the video and try to give a response. When you're finished, return to the video and then listen to a sample response. Now let's listen to a sample response. I think I would prefer having a lower salary with more vacation time. And in fact, this is the actual situation I have right now. I used to be a public school teacher, but now I'm an English teacher for adults and for adult international students. And it pays a lot less money, but it gives me greater job satisfaction. And I think that's the first thing, is that I can help more people and feel more connected to my mission of helping students. And I think students are much more grateful because this is a service we provide to them for free. It's kind of a true, pure educational environment, and I think we can both learn from each other in that type of situation. I also like the fact that I get to take more vacation time when I want to. This allows me to kind of be a lot more flexible, especially with my wife, and I get to spend more time with her. So I think in a way I can connect in a deeper way. I don't have to worry about waiting to take vacation time. Many times that I can just take this time and not have to worry about that. So what did you hear in my response? Well, again, I tried to focus on about 2 reasons, which is what I'm going to recommend when you prepare for the test. If you notice in reason number 1, I did refer to that greater job satisfaction. And I said basically that the most important thing to me was to help other people. And because it was sort of connected to my mission in life. And because what we provide for free, it's kind of a true or pure educational environment where we can both learn from each other. I also mentioned in my opinion that I think it would bring greater family satisfaction. Because thanks to this flexible work schedule and greater vacation time, I could spend more time with my family and connect with them in a deeper way. So notice what I did is I pulled some of the pros that I could try to identify with while thinking about, of course, the con for making more money. Because really the idea here is if I'd make more money but couldn't spend more time with my family, that would definitely be a con. So in this case, you notice that in my response, I tried to focus on both the pros and cons of both ideas to try to strengthen my argument. And oftentimes that's what you need to do. But it really will depend on the response and what the topic is requiring. Now, as mentioned in the previous videos, I do think recording yourself is the best way to help prepare for the TOEIC. However, because of the highly specific nature of question 11, I would really recommend, again, getting that great Grant True book, Tactics for TOEIC Speaking and Writing. And that's really the best way, I think, in order to practice with ETS-approved material. Now, we're going to review very quickly all of the different questions and tasks that we see on the test. So once again, recall that there are a total of 11 questions, and the test itself is going to be about 20 minutes. So let's go through each one very quickly again. If you recall, the first task was reading a text aloud, in which we had to read a passage of about 150 to 200 words out loud. The passage itself was usually an announcement or some kind of advertisement. And the hint that we gave was that you needed to think like an announcer, which means if you read the passage in the appropriate spirit of the passage, then I think you will be able to basically give a better response. So when we refer to the criteria, remember the basic criteria are focusing on pronunciation, which usually means pronouncing the sounds of English correctly, using appropriate word stress, especially those that we call thought groups, making sure we emphasize the correct words in those particular groups. And then finally the idea of intonation, using the appropriate rising and falling action, especially again with those ideas that involve thought groups. In the second video, we reviewed the idea of describing a picture. If you recall, we talked about that you needed to focus on the important elements in the photo and follow a basic strategy. We suggested these 3 steps. Establish the scene by looking at the overall picture and thinking about where the scene is taking place. Then zooming in on the most important elements first. So which particular people in the picture or particular ideas seem to be the most important, and focus on those first. And then finally, go back to the other elements in the picture and then fill in with the missing information. Now again, the idea was we wanted to connect our hint here is connect ideas together and to make our response more interesting. Again, the basic criteria involve the pronunciation, stress, and intonation, but also the idea of cohesion, using those appropriate signal words that we talked about earlier. We wanted to make sure that we used at least a minimum idea of grammatical structure, but then we also realized that to get a better score, we needed to use a little bit more complex grammatical structure. And then finally, vocabulary. Of course, the minimum idea is we want to use the correct words, but then the maximum idea to get a better score would be to use words that are interesting. And then finally, the hint on this side is, as we said before, that usually vocabulary is valued a little bit more than grammar. In the third video, we talked about responding to questions. The first sets of questions we looked at were looking at questions related to the same prompt. In general, the first 2 questions are shorter, and then the third question is longer. Remember that no preparation time is given for these particular questions. And the hint that we provided was that the third question usually connects to the second question and requires more details because it's a longer response. The criteria, of course, involve pronunciation, stress, and intonation, cohesion, grammar, and vocabulary, of course, but then also two important ideas of relevance, in other words, making sure that we give information that relates to the actual topic, and we said that this was the minimum requirement for this task. And then, of course, completeness. Completeness is what's going to get us a better score. In the same video, we also looked at responding to questions that use information that's already provided to us, some sort of graphic element, like a schedule or agenda. Once again, we have no prep time, and this time we cannot see the questions on the screen itself. So we said that we need to pay attention to the fine print on the graphic, and also how information can be reworded using synonymous ideas. In terms of criteria, all of the same criteria we referred to the previous task, that relevance and completeness are both very important. In our fourth video, we looked at proposing a solution. If you recall, we proposed a solution to a customer who's left a message at the company, and that you are an employee at this company and have some responsibility for solving the problem. So the hint that we gave was that you need to use good customer service skills in order to deliver a response. All of the criteria for the previous topics are the same, but then we added the idea here that you need to understand your role with the company, and that you have to follow an appropriate progression in your response. So the idea here is if you're a customer service person, you generally need to start with the appropriate greeting, and then generally apologize for the problem, and then propose a solution. So the idea was that there was a certain progression that we have to follow. In this, our final video, we looked at expressing an opinion. And here are some basic ideas we discussed. Get to the point. Make sure that you get directly to the reasons for your response. We also suggested, as in the sample response, to give maybe 2 or 3 reasons at most. And that using personal examples will help illustrate the reasons that you're trying to give. So be specific if you can. Use interesting vocabulary. And avoid those words we call the blah words. We want to use cohesive devices. And again, that's mostly referring to signal words that will help connect information together. And then finally, we want to make sure we avoid all of those speaking errors and filler ideas. So for this final video, we will once again remind you that the TOEIC does have an official website and includes other helpful products that you can get for purchase. But still, in my opinion, the best texts available to help you prepare for the TOEIC are provided by Grant True and Oxford University Press. And again, that listening and reading test and the speaking and writing test both have separate textbooks. And the great thing about the speaking and writing texts is that you'll see actual examples from test takers that will help you understand how the scoring system works. And finally, that new TOEFL TOEIC website that we have, you can find a link to that at the bottom of this video. Thanks for watching. Coming soon in March 2013, our TOEIC Writing Skills Preparation Series.